Hello, my name is Brian Dolan, and I'm very privileged to be able to give this address, although from around 12,700 miles away in Christchurch, New Zealand, right now. And this is the International Year of the Nurse and the Midwife 2020, and what an International Year of Nurse and Midwife it is, and certainly not the one that we'd have expected by any stretch. But it's also, instead of a year that may have been perhaps had a tone of self-congratulations and aren't we remarkable, it's turned into one where never has nursing had such a high profile. Never before have we seen nurses stepping up, doing stuff that like they've never done before, and the same with our medical and allied health and other colleagues. No longer do we talk about unskilled workers, we talk about essential workers, and these essential workers are essential human beings. And what an amazing time to be alive. And one of the extraordinary things is about working in care of the elderly wards. And I'm going to circle back to that language in a little while as well. But what's really important is actually when you think about it where you work, every organization now is caring for older people. Unless you're working in pediatrics and midwifery to some extent, even their age profile for women is getting considerably older than it ever has been. But the majority of people who are in hospital wards are older people. Care of the elderly wards are focused on older people, but the reality is you have a skill set that is now essentially a universal skill set. But how do you build on it? And how do you build a positivity of the opportunities that's been presented by COVID-19 to us as a profession? Because the thing is, it's around, to my mind, it's about leadership and what you look for. Because we have choices. We have a choice to catastrophize, or we have a choice to see positives. And those are conscious decisions that we make. And when we start making conscious decisions, they of time become subconscious conditions or even unconscious conditions where you're actually finding stuff without even trying to look for it. So I constantly see all the good that this opportunity of COVID-19 has given us amidst all the awfulness that's happened. This has been a time when the NHS and social care has transformed like no other. It's been a time when for years we've known about, look at the opportunities that there would be to use technology to connect loved ones who may be a long way away from the ones they love, who haven't got the opportunity to travel, who may be in different countries, can now talk to their loved one. There's opportunities like instead of somebody with COPD going to an outpatients department, walking from the car, sitting in a chair, having to wait for an hour or two, and then they have their 15 minutes and then they walk back and then they spend the next 2 days lying in bed recovering. And now we can do it on FaceTime or on WhatsApp. And talking to older people's health medical colleagues here in Christchurch, where they're saying, this is what we can do. Let's not go back to what we had. Let us embrace and keep hold of the things that this has offered us. Because here's a question for everybody. If you had 1,000 days left to live, how many would you choose to spend in hospital? And I suspect like you, like me, like most of us, the answer would be none or as few as possible. Because in fact, there are millions and millions of beds in Britain. They're just in people's homes. And where would you want to spend as much of your last 1,000 days as possible to be in their homes? And yet we do know that if you come into hospital, the longer you wait in hospital, the more harm unintentionally that can befall you. And up to 65% of people who are older end up with deconditioning, a loss of muscle, a loss of blood volume, lung capacity, skin integrity to manifest through pressure sores, constipation because the bowel starts to, peristalsis slows down, leading to constipation. People leave hospital malnourished. Big thing is, if you're not mobilizing, you're not going to get hungry. And if you're not going to get hungry, you won't want to eat. And it becomes a cycle, which is never going to have a good ending. And then people become increasingly frail. And frail is an interesting loaded term itself, because if you ask a person, if you say to a person you're frail, you usually would have to be some distance away from it, because frailty is what happens to others. And people who are older, we sometimes look at them, and I think the role of people who work in elder care is elder care nurses, doctors, therapists, people who care for older people. They are really archaeologists, because they see past the ruins to the beauty that lies within. And while they may be wrinkled, you know, somebody who is 70, back in 1970, was only 20 years of age. And what he wouldn't have been listening to, or she wouldn't have been listening to, is they wouldn't have been listening to Dame Vera Lynn, God rest her. They wouldn't have been listening to Glenn Miller and all those wartime songs, because that was old people's music back in 1970. They were listening to the Stones, The Who, Black Sabbath, Creedence Clearwater Revival, the Beatles. Maybe they'd have listened to Cliff Richard, some of them. But I do know this, when you look after somebody who's 70, they would have a rock and roll heartbeat. If you're looking after somebody who's 80, they were around for the start of rock and roll with Bill Haley and the Comets. These are people who had vim and zest and energy and vitality, and they're not this frail old person in their minds and in their heart. And great leaders recognize that and enable their staff to see the beauty that lies within. Because leadership isn't a job title. Leadership is a set of behaviors. Leadership is an attitude. And if you think you have great staff, do you know what? Without you telling them, your staff know you think they are great. And the reverse is also true. If you don't rate your people, they already know it. So the job of leaders is not just to lift their teams, it's to lift their game. It's to make something that's enjoyable and something that matters. And what drew me to emergency care, as somebody who'd worked in psych, I'd qualified first as a psych nurse, and many of our people, the people we looked after, were older people. But what drew me to emergency care was not trauma. It was psychiatrically unwell people. It was older people. It was homeless people. It was what one person said to me once as the unloved and even the occasionally unlovable. But it was the vulnerable. It was those without voice. It was those who, whether it was because of their psychiatric comorbidities or their dementias or their illness or their many manifestations of their vulnerability, that drew me to look after those kind of people. And I've never lost it. I've never lost that sense of reward where you don't just care for somebody, you care about them. And it used to be that, as it was called, Jerry's was kind of seen as, oh my God, I've got to go to Jerry's. It wasn't an attractive thing. But actually everywhere now is older person's health. But one thing we need to look at is our language evolving just as we evolve. And I think there's a real difficulty with calling care of the elderly, because the is the definitive, the is the othering of people. It is the elderly, not us. We don't talk about, I'm going to be working care of the children, care of the adult, care of the middle-aged, but we talk about care of the elderly and not older people. You know, it's a funny old thing, society, because we love old wines and we love old records and we love old cars. We don't always love older people. And I think we have a collective responsibility to change that narrative. You know, back in 2017, 17% of people were over the age of 65. I think 2.5% were over 85. Now, by 2020, that number's probably crept up a little bit. It's nearly 1 in 5 people. There's certainly more people now in Britain who are over 65 than are under 16. Old people, this is the time that has come. And what we're looking at now for people in their 90s, they were the greatest generation. We commemorated them and recognized them in VE Day that was back on May the 8th. And yet they're also the most vulnerable of all in society, especially when you put COVID into the mix. So we have a collective responsibility to look out for them, stand up for them, advocate for them, fight for them, just as once, long before we were born, they did that for us. It's about recognizing that it is care of older people is more than just a job. It's an opportunity to say, this is about me looking after my future self. Because I want to be, one day, I will be that old man who is on the receiving end of care, not on the giving end of care. And I'd like that care to be as brilliant as I'd want it to be for me, but not wait for that, build up to it. So none of us need to worry about what will it be, because we will wake up in a heartbeat and we will be that person. And wouldn't you want it to be as good as it can be? And wouldn't you want to start today? And there's an old Native American saying that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. Because it's never ever too late to start. It's never too late to start making a difference. And sometimes it means changing our language. Sometimes it means shifting our attitudes. Sometimes it means is rethinking what we thought about and recalibrating how we see ourselves and how we see the world. You see, courage is from seeing stuff differently and leaning into that discomfort of seeing stuff differently and saying, actually, maybe there's another way. And maybe this is a way that we could do stuff even better. And when you think about it, the last 4 or 5 months, that's exactly what's happened. People, when you trust clinicians, from my experience of working in New Zealand, Australia, UK, Ireland, America, all kinds of places, I know this. The only thing that really changes in healthcare is the accent. Everywhere is uniquely similar. But I also know is when you trust clinicians, things will work out. When you trust clinicians and enable them, and your job, whether if you're a band 6 or a band 7, whether you're the director of nursing, great one like Melanie, Dolan, like Diana and Lisa Pinckney, fantastic team members, what you end up is when it's, your real job as a leader is you are the director of permission giving. What would it be like if you go back to your units and you say to your staff, what would you do if you knew the answer was yes? And once you get past the one-liners and get people really, really thinking about it, that's how you start change happening. And the thing is encouraging small change. See, people don't mind change. They do mind being changed. When they own the change, when it's their ideas, when they are trusted, they will move mountains. But here's the thing, is when you trust people, that's about allowing yourself to be vulnerable and not stepping in, but allowing it to flourish. But the trick with change, I think, is it's not about big change. It's about little changes. And if you create 1,000 little changes, what you have done is changed your organization. Because change starts with one heart, one mind, one conversation at a time. And first people change, and then organizations change. And it's in that order. And over the coming months, what I'll be doing is a whole series of webinars for you that'll be recorded. They'll be around 45 to 60 minutes long. There'll be an opportunity to go in the chat. We'll have conversations as well. And they'll be all about all kinds of things, what I call a subversive leadership program, where it's about rethinking what we thought. It's about how do you make change happen when change is hard? How do you connect with people? How do you liberate the talent? And how, when you're in this extraordinary specialty of the care of the older person, how do you look out for them? How do you make sure that they feel safe? Not just in the clinical sense, but in the emotional, spiritual sense as well. Then that their loved ones know that they will be too. And if they can't come and visit, that doesn't matter, because they know the one that they love most is there with you. And they know that you are leading a great team. They know that you matter and what you do counts. Because right now, this is a global storm and we're all in it. But we might all be in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. Each of our boats are different, but each of us matters. And when we look back towards the end of our last 1,000 days, at least we can know this. We can know we were loved, we mattered, and we were enough. And if you are in where you are right now, what an extraordinary time to be alive and be part of something that's so exciting, because you matter, you are loved, and you are enough. Thank you, and I can't wait to keep working with you.